This video is going to be my attempt to present and talk about some of my findings and evaluations as it pertains to one wide receiver position, the big X receiver. Now, some of the X receivers in this draft are not necessarily big. Maybe they're only 6 foot tall, and there's guys who fall within multiple categories. We'll talk about the categories and archetypes here in a moment. This video was born out of, I'm a Ravens content creator, first and foremost, to be honest with you. And it was born out of knowing that the Ravens are in need of improving the wide receiver core. The front office has stated as such. So they put themselves out there. And look, our opinion as collective Ravens fans is actually a little bit skewed because neither Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, or Lamar Jackson played in like the last, I think, 5 weeks of the season. Rashad Bateman didn't play after week 5, I believe. Actually, I think it was week 8. My apologies. Devin Duvernay lasted a little bit longer before an injury that some of us suspect was actually lingering for longer, and Lamar Jackson, of course, didn't play the last 6 games. Look, anyway, I've spent the last probably 6 or 7 weeks, the better part of almost 2 months, I guess, looking at wide receivers in this draft. And I've done short videos on Twitter, shared some longer content to my Patreon. I've done player profile videos on YouTube that don't show game film, and this video here will not show game film, just so you know. I will link up I'll provide a link to all of the player profile videos up here right now in the top right corner. You're welcome to check that out. Now pause this video and check those out if you want to, but there's a significant amount. I think I've done 11 player profile videos on wide receivers like A.T. Perry here. But the one thing I haven't done is rank them. I haven't ranked receivers. First of all, I don't think I'm good at it. It's just something I've never felt the need to do. Point number 2, besides not being good at it. It's not what I was trained to do as a coach. I prefer to look at the film and try to detail what I think someone can do, what I think a player can do, what they're capable of, and maybe describe to you where I think that player, in this case wide receivers, can be most effective, and how NFL teams can use some of these guys coming from college that play in all kinds of different systems, and then how they can try to compile them or make them fit into the system that certain NFL teams run. Having said that, we will be ranking wide receivers a little bit today, but I'm going to do it in my own custom manner, to be honest with you. I'm not going to compare, or I guess I should say, I'm not going to force select players between like Zay Flowers and JSN. They're different players. Even though both of them are going to play in the slot a lot in the NFL, you would suspect with Zay Flowers that he might be moved around more, but JSN's a big guy. He weighs 205 pounds. He may play more on the outside than he did in college. Nor will I try to say who I think is better between Quentin Johnston and Josh Downs, because Quentin Johnston's truly an X, and Downs, who's a fantastic player in his own right, primarily played in the slot while lighting up the ACC the last 2 years. So what we'll first do is categorize the wide receivers as best I can. And what I mean by that is, based on the film that I have watched, I'm going to try to put them into the archetypes, or the categories that I think they belong in the most, but there's some crossover, and then rank them. And we're going to start with the big X receivers. In some cases, they're 6 foot, 6'1" guys. All right, slot receivers will be the second video. It'll be part 2 that I do of this. I'm hoping to get this in about 15, 18 minutes. Then balanced or Z receivers, and there's a long explanation or conversation to have there about what's the difference between a Z and an X. Why are you saying that a Z is more balanced? It kind of comes down to old school days of 21 personnel. So 2 running backs, 1 tight end, 2 receivers, and the Z being off the line, tight end being on. So when you go pro I, your typical formation, the Z is off the line, let's say to the right, same side of the tight end. And when you go twins I, maybe the tight end is still to the right. Now the Z and the X are over to the left. The Z is the guy who adjusts. The Z is the guy who goes from one side to the other based on the call. That's my point in saying it's a little more balanced. But there's a longer conversation or explanation to be had there beyond just what I mentioned there. That's not the point of this video, so we're going to move on. Then the fourth category that I'll really focus on in a fourth video, I guess, or maybe a third, depending on how much people like these and what the feedback is home run hitters. So Jalen Hyatt, Zay Flowers, Tyler Scott. There's guys that can fit into a couple categories. Obviously, Zay Flowers being one of them. So the approach here is imperfect. I will say that up front. All right, my approach is imperfect in putting them in categories and then talking about the players in categories. All right, but so is just a blanket ranking. I'm just going to be straightforward. Just saying he's my number one wide receiver in this draft. He's my number 3. He's my number 5. Just doing that without talking about schematic adjustments that might need to be made for a 5'8" slot or a 172-pound guy who might run a 4.3 in Jalen Hyatt's case. Just doing a blanket ranking is also an imperfect science. So they're both imperfect, right? We're people who have regular jobs or regular situations, and we're trying to evaluate the NFL. So in any case, I'm going to start with the X receivers, all right? So the big X receivers. And I think there's, a ton of versatile guys in this draft. Dante Demas is going to be a guy that I'm going to talk about at length a little bit later. Potential second-round talent guy, if you ask me, were it not for an ACL injury. Other talented receivers at Maryland getting a lot of targets or a significant number of targets. I think there's a lot of guys in this draft who can contribute. And the reason why I bring up Dante Demas is not just because I really like him, and I did a Twitter video on him that I'll try to link up here, and I did a draft profile video that I'll put up here as well. I really like him as a player. I root for him to succeed in the NFL, but he reminds me of so many guys in this draft who maybe aren't, quote, number one wide receivers immediately or ever, but they can contribute something substantial to an NFL offense for 6 to 8 years, make generational wealth for their family, and are worthy of us talking about and considering. Xavier Hutchinson is another guy from Iowa State. To be honest with you, I don't have a ton of film of him. I mention those guys because I think they're names that don't get talked about a whole lot, but they're capable guys. And this draft is filled with good to maybe not, great wide receiver talent like those guys. So in any case, let's talk about who the X receivers are that I think are worthy of our examination. All right, and then we'll get back to the 2 pictures you just saw there briefly in a moment. So Quentin Johnston, Jonathan Mingo, Cedric Tillman, Rashee Rice, A.T. Perry, Dante Demas, Andre Iosivas, hopefully I'm saying his name correctly, and Xavier Hutchinson. There's other guys. All right, there's the West Virginia receiver who's 6'4", 220, ran like a 4.38 or 4.39. So Quentin Johnston generally ranked in the top 3 wide receivers. It's been that way for a while as it relates to this draft. It wouldn't, but to be honest with you, to rank them, I'm not going to rank them 1 through 8, the guys I just named, or 1 through 9. I'm going to tell you that the 4 guys I have in a group for me personally is Johnston, Tillman, A.T. Perry, and Jonathan Mingo, who you do not see a picture of here. It would not surprise me if Quentin Johnston is a guy who has 75 catches next year, depending on where he goes, and 10, 12 touchdowns, or maybe a smaller number is 8. He's almost a home run hitter in a big X body. So that's what I say, it's imperfect science approaching things in this way. I recognize that up front. But it also wouldn't surprise me if the SEC guys that I mentioned, Cedric Tillman or Jonathan Mingo, don't end up having more impact early. They're just so physically imposing. It's 6'3", 215, 217, somewhere around there, I think, in both of their cases. They're both so incredibly talented. I think really highly of Cedric Tillman. I'll talk about him here in a moment. A.T. Perry is another guy that, for me, just showed real potential at Wake Forest. Look, it's the ACC, but if you don't know, in the last 2 years, just statistical impact here. A.T. Perry registered 150 catches, 26 touchdowns in 2021 and 2022 combined. So 1 out of every 6 catches of his in the last 2 years was a touchdown. If I did my math right? 25 over 150 as a fraction. I think we're reduced to, 1 over 6, roughly. And it's not like he only had 100 catches or he only had 82 or in those 2 years combined. He had 150. He has 71 in 2021 and 81 in 2022. And 26 of those were touchdowns. Those are the 4 guys for me as the X receivers that I rank as the highest. That if I'm forced to do a ranking system, they're the guys that, I would say are at the top. And I'm okay with someone saying Quentin Johnston's the number 1 guy. Come on, coach. He's been ranked in the top 3 receivers for this draft for over a year. I'm okay if someone says it's Cedric Tillman. There's a lot of guys in our Discord who have said they think it's Cedric Tillman. I'm fine with that. There's one guy who says it's Xavier Hutchinson, who I'm showing you a picture of here. Were it not for an ACL injury, again, Dante Demas is a guy who would be looked at second round. And he may still get drafted late second, early third round. You just never know what teams see, what their schematic fits are at 6'4". He's got a huge catch radius and surprising speed. Rashee Rice, who I haven't talked about, but I did a Twitter video and a YouTube prospect video on him. When you go watch the film, he looks physically ready, even though, who knows how tall he actually is. 6'3", 6'2". Somebody said he measured 6'1". The guys that I know the least about, to be honest with you, is Andre Iosivas, the wide receiver from Princeton, and Xavier Hutchinson from Iowa State. I just don't have much film of those guys. I do not. I would add in some names who you may not know, and don't be surprised if these guys get drafted and aren't just undrafted free agents. Jadakiss Bonds, a 6'3" wide receiver from Hampton, 34 career touchdowns. I believe he sat out 2020. I may be misremembering that, but he's 6'3", powerful as hell, and very fast. Don't be surprised if he gets drafted, and it may not be just the last round. Another guy from HBCU school that I think is incredibly talented and very smooth, very dangerous every time he touches the ball. 6'4" Shaquan Davis, South Carolina State, which if you don't know, that's like an NFL pipeline in some ways. Darius Leonard, Javon Hargrave, multiple guys. Davis is supremely confident. Him and Jadakiss Bonds, in my opinion, they belong in this conversation of the big X receivers. They don't belong in the conversation of, the top four guys. The big X receiver that I think a lot of guys in our Discord and my Patreon are really enamored with is Cedric Tillman. Mingo and Perry and Johnston, I think Johnston's got incredible potential, especially if he improves, actually high pointing the football like a NFL receivers should in most cases do, or most situations do, and by definition, therefore, using his hands to catch the ball as opposed to his body, taking advantage of his size and his range. But a lot of guys in our Discord right now are high on Cedric Tillman, who didn't play a lot in 2022, didn't have the same statistical impact. After really making a name for himself in 2021, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to be up front. I do not enjoy watching Tennessee's offense. I'm not sure why I do not. There's a lot of things about it that are not enjoyable for me. I think it's very simplistic and there's very few offbeat plays. A lot of things are on the same timing pattern, and I think that's why they oftentimes will hit big plays or struggle and punt. But Cedric Tillman, getting back to him, he had two performances in 2021 that just cannot be go unmentioned. And they were against the best two teams in the country in 2021, Alabama and Georgia. Of course, they played in the national championship game that year. Georgia won, avenging their loss in the SEC title game. Those games stick in my mind. For the season, 2021, Cedric Tillman, 64 catches, 1,080 yards, 12 touchdowns as a junior, okay? But check this out. The two best teams he played in 2021. And if you got film of them or a way to access, if you don't have film of them, I do, and I can let you watch it if you join my Patreon. Alabama, 2021, 7 catches, 152 yards, and a touchdown. Georgia, 2021, 10 catches, 200 yards, and a touchdown. So, 17 catches, 352 yards, and 2 touchdowns against Georgia and Alabama in 2021. And it's not like it was on 30 targets. I believe there was 5 balls that he didn't catch when he was targeted. So I think it was 17 for 22. And I may be a little off there. If there's anybody who watches SEC film, SEC games more than I do, you're more than welcome to correct me on that in the comment section. But also in the latter half of 2021, Cedric Tillman, completely dominant in the last 7 games for Tennessee. Last 7 games of 2021, 48 catches. So you're talking about an average of 7 catches a game, 10 touchdowns, 800 and I think 91 yards receiving. If I was to pick one guy right now, I would want one of those 4. Again, there's multiple guys in our Discord that think that it's Cedric Tillman. Mingo, Perry, Johnston, Tillman. Today, if you tried to say to me, who would you pick? This is an unpopular choice. It would be A.T. Perry. I can't deny the production, how smooth he looks on all 3 levels. Big plays down the field, outside the numbers, so the outer third. Post routes, deep curl routes, climb concepts, which is somewhat similar to a post, but I call it a little different because of where the ball actually connects with the receiver, but that's a topic for another day. But if you ask me tomorrow, I might pick Jonathan Mingo because I really like him as well. But I think he's more of a third-round guy. I think A.T. Perry is probably a late second, third-round guy. It's possible that I'm off on some of these projections. Some of these guys might go in the 4th. Look, draft night, If Quentin Johnston's there at 22, I might advocate for the Ravens to take him. If the Ravens somehow end up with a late second round pick and didn't go receiver at 22, they damn sure better be picking one of these four guys for me if they're still around. Look, you let me know in the comments section what your thoughts are on the X receivers. This is just focusing on those guys. There's people that I didn't mention or talk about a whole lot. I mean, Tyler Scott running a 4.2 doesn't get mentioned with guys like Jalen Hyatt and Zay Flowers in terms of being home run hitters. Most of the people I talk about football with daily mention these names. I just don't have enough time to watch all of the film, which, I make available to anyone who has my Patreon, or anyone who, pays for my Patreon is in my Discord. We have an online database where people can watch it themselves. And for the most part, I would say my views align with most of the people that are in our Discord, which at this point I think is like 74 people. Whether you have Tillman as the top X receiver in the draft or Quentin Johnston, which I think will be the more popular pick, there's other guys in this class who will play the X. I mean, Jalen Hyatt and Zay Flowers are going to play some X. They're going to be soloed up on the backside of formation sometimes because they got big playability, just like Tyler Scott, big playability. I felt like the guys that I presented to you, the 8 receivers that I talked about, in some cases briefly, are the more so big X receivers that are going to see more time playing X, playing the backside of formations, trying to present teams with the constant decision. And do I leave him one-on-one backside, even though he's 6'3", 6'4" in some cases? Or do I leave a safety back over the top, and now maybe numbers-wise I can't deal with the other side of the formation, whether it's a 2x1 formation or in most cases, a 3x1 formation. And that's what the big X receiver does. That's why the X is 6'3", 6'4". Because they want to force teams to leave the safety backside. You may say just double him. Well, it's not that simple. It's not always a double. It's the threat of a double. The backside safety in trips sometimes is responsible for 3 vertical from the other side. So they make it look like he's there to help out on one, on a deep curl or something like that, or a vertical, and really he's not. He's there to help out on 3 vertical on the other side. But that's not just modern football. That's been around forever, okay? Part 2 of this series, we'll be talking about the home run hitters. You saw the picture a couple of times of Jalen Hyatt, Zay Flowers, Tyler Scott, and some other guys, thrown in there as well. Guys who maybe are only going to end up with 60, 65 catches next year, but 6, 8, 10 of them could be touchdowns because of their talent level, because of their speed. This was my attempt to talk about the X position and officially rank them, even though I did cop out a little bit and only group them into the top 4, leaving out some other guys like Iosivich and Hutchinson, who I don't have a ton of film of admittedly. These are the 4 guys that I would say are the most alluring for me as a Ravens fan to see them draft, or for any team for that matter, who's looking at an X receiver of some size. A.T. Perry, I think, isn't actually 6'5". I think he measured 6'4" or 6'3" 3/4 at the combine or something like that. That earlier pick you saw had him, denoted him at 6'5". But all of these guys generally in the 6'3", 6'4" range, wide catch radius, long arms, ability to make contested catches. Even though Quentin Johnston is not rated highly as a contested catch guy, physically the ability looks like it should be there. It would be an element of his game that if he was able to advance the contested catch output or production, then that would kind of put him over the top, if you ask me. There's some missing elements to his game, and I think that's one of them. It's a pretty big missing element for a guy who's going to play the X, which is typically to the boundary in a lot of levels of football. The NFL, the hashes are closer together, so the field and boundaries isn't as big of a differential, but still boundary side X is generally drawing the better, man corner so that he's just left over there man to man, and then everyone else can deal with the front side of the formation or the back out of the backfield. My point is, Quentin Johnston, Cedric Tillman, A.T. Perry, Jonathan Mingo, who's not pictured here, are my guys that I think is the best group, the best 4 big X receivers. They would be the guys that I would think any team should look at if their needs are such that they need a big X, because that's really what it comes down to in the draft. And that's why I don't rank players. That's why I don't rank them overall, because Zay Flowers provides something different than Cedric Tillman does. And a team might not need a Zay Flowers. They might already have a Tyler Lockett, or they might already have an Amon-Ra St. Brown, but they may need a Cedric Tillman, or they may need an A.T. Perry, a guy who can play on the backside, be a little bit more of a physical mismatch for smaller DBs, and force you as a defense to put your bigger, more physical corner on him to kind of set the offense into understanding where their matchups are going to be, allow the quarterback to predict coverages, because that's really what it comes down to in a lot of ways is defenses align in a certain way when they're going to play man. And the big X, the 6'3", 6'4" receiver, forces teams to kind of match that physicality in a lot of ways. That's why I started with this position. If you guys appreciated or enjoyed this video, this type of video, please let me know in the comment section. If you do not, let me know the same as well. And if you think other people would, NFL football fans would enjoy this content, please consider sharing a link on social media to help this video get more reach.